So if you are interested, why don't we take a short break and prettify our tags section? Right now, we've mostly taken the simplest possible approach. But really, if you think about it, it starts to fall short pretty quickly. Imagine we have 20 tags. Well, that's a pretty big select box that we would have to use. And then simple things like if we have these two selected, well, if we want to add another one, but we forget to hold down Command, well, of course, we lose the original selection, which can be a little annoying. Okay, so let's take 5 minutes. We'll pull in some JavaScript to make this a little bit cleaner. Now, what I like to use is a plugin called Select2. So if we take a quick look at some of the examples, notice in this case, this would be what we want. So we start choosing, and notice this is a much more comfortable interface for us. And if I need to remove them, I hit the X. Okay? So let's add this to our project. If I switch back, the first step is, well, why don't we reference these on the CDN, and then at the end of the video, I'll show you how to download these locally, and then add them to your Gulp file. So why don't we grab both of these, and back in our editor, we will switch over to our master page, and place this at the top. Why don't we take the script, though, and put it right down here at the bottom. Now, this depends on jQuery, so I will reference that, once again, just directly from their website. And then at the end of the video, we'll download all of this stuff. Next, we want to check out our form, right? And then down here, we'll add a section for the footer. Stuff we want to add to the footer from this partial. So we'll add a script tag here, and all we want to do is track down this select. Why don't we give it an ID really quickly? Right up here. ID will be tag list as well. Now I can say fetch that using jQuery and then call select2 on it. And with that alone, why don't we switch over to the browser? And it looks like it's trying to work, but it's a little funny. We must have referenced our CSS wrong. Back to the master page. Looks like we just forgot rel style sheet. Or really, we copied and pasted that, so the documentation on GitHub was missing that. I think that'll fix it. Yeah, there it goes. Cool. Already looks so much better. Look at that. One call to a jQuery plugin, and it's working. So cool. So let's update our article, and if we take a look, it's working. Let's remove one. Let's remove coding, and then update the article, and everything is working just like it did before. But now, very clearly, this is a lot easier on the eyes and our fingers. Perfect. Now, I don't want to dig into the plugin too much, but I'll show you a few things that you might be interested in. One would be a placeholder. So we could say placeholder is choose a tag. Come back, give it a refresh, and now we just have a little more feedback for the user. Now in this case, notice that if we type something that doesn't exist in that tags list, well, we can't choose it. I can't hit return here. It won't allow me. And in some situations, that's exactly what we want. We have this list of tags. You can filter it down if you need to, but if you type something that isn't offered, you're not allowed to use that, right? So that's cool, but there are also situations where maybe you do want to allow for that. For example, we have our list of tags, but maybe we want to give the user an easy way to automatically create new tags. So if I add some term here and that doesn't exist, well, I still wanted to accept that, and then behind the scenes, we can detect that we need to create a new tag. That way it's pretty seamless for the user, right? Rather than having to go somewhere like tag/create, manually create a tag, and then come back here and select it, right? That makes sense. So if that turns out to be the case for your project, you can set tags to true. And that's it. Come back, refresh, and now this time we can choose personal or work, but I can choose something else, and notice I can hit enter and it will allow that. So just remember, if you go this route, well, you still need to have the logic behind the scenes to detect that you do need to create a new tag. Now, while we are here, imagine that you don't actually want to pass in your tags from the controller. Maybe you want to fetch it dynamically. For example, you make an AJAX request to some URI, and that'll fetch some information from the database and return it. That can be useful. So if that's the case, Well, actually, to start, you can pass through a data property, and this could be an array of objects. So for example, ID equals 1, and then text is equal to 1. And let's duplicate that, just to give you a quick example. Now in this case, we actually already have a tag list, so these would be appended to what we already have. However, if you didn't have that tag list and you just had a select element there, then our data property would fill those with option tags. So let's take a look. Give it a refresh, and now, yeah, we have 1 and 2 there. Now, alternatively, you don't want to hard code the data. Like I said, you want to make a JSON request. Well, in that case, you can use the AJAX property here, and that'll just map to jQuery's AJAX functionalities. So I could say like the data type is JSON. We are fetching some JSON from an endpoint in our app. And quick note, don't forget that whenever you return some kind of eloquent call directly from a method, like return user all, well, Laravel is automatically going to cast that to JSON for you. It's one of its cool features. So don't forget that. But anyways, we could set the data type, we could set the URL to hit, so maybe tags or API/tags. You could set a delay, so don't make this request each time unless 250 milliseconds have passed. And then of course we need to pass it some data so that we know which tags to fetch. This may be relevant. So we have our params here, and then whatever we return will be treated as the request data. So if we want to pass through like Q for query or term, whatever you want to call it, and this would be params.term. So params.term would be equal to whatever the user types in here. Okay? And that way, if you want to, as the user types, you could filter the results. And then finally, we're going a little off topic here, but if you need to process the results to get them in the right format to use with the plugin, then once again, we could use a process results method, where we just specify what to treat the results as. So is it data, or are we fetching a specific property that we return from our server? It just depends. So yeah, this isn't really necessary for our project, but if you're building something with a much larger result set, well, this can be a good approach to filter that down. Or many times though, by the way, you just want to fetch some kind of URL. So you could say, I want to fetch JSON from this endpoint. So we could say URL is tags.json. And now the Select2 plugin will fetch the tags.json file. And keep in mind, that will look within the public folder, of course, because it will be example.com/tags.json. So that file would need to exist here. So it'll fetch that data. And then once again, you just need to process the results to let Select2 know the correct format that it needs. So in this case, once again, we accept the data, and then we return whatever should be treated as the results from that AJAX request. But yeah, lots of cool stuff here. Like I said though, in our case, what we have right here will do just fine. So come back, refresh, and we can make our selection like we did before, but this is way better than what we had in the last episode. So now, to wrap up this video, well, back in app.blade, we're referencing a CDN here, which in many cases is good. However, we're starting to get to the point where we have lots of HTTP requests going on. So this sounds like a good excuse for us to leverage Gulp and Laravel Elixir. So our first step will be to fetch these. Now, you could manually open up your browser and just copy and paste this into a new file, but I'm going to use wget, which is pretty useful. You probably already know what it is. If you don't, if you know what Homebrew is, then you could do brew install wget, or if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. Just manually fetch the files from the browser. So let's go into our resources directory, and why don't we make a directory CSS? And within there, why don't we make one more on that note for our libraries? All right, let's go ahead and fetch that. And there we go. We have our first one. Next, we're going to do the exact same thing for our JavaScript. So for that, though, I'm going to cd out of here and create a new one for JavaScript. And then let's do the exact same thing for a libs directory. Okay, now this time we will fetch jQuery. Cool. And then we also want to fetch the Select2 plugin. Great. Now we have everything we need so we can switch over to our gulp file and clean a lot of this up. Why don't we start with the CSS? So we are pulling in Bootstrap, followed by our app file, followed by select2. All right, well, let's go into our gulp file. We are mixing Sass, so next, we will mix some style sheets. Now, by default with the styles method, it's going to assume a resources/CSS base directory, but of course you can change that. So it looks like we want libs bootstrap.min.css, and then we want app.css, which doesn't yet exist there. Right now we are compiling it to the public folder, so we will need to change that. And to do that, well, if I show you the source for this, notice we give it the source files, and then the second argument would be the output path. So let's set that to resources/CSS. And in fact, let me show you what that looks like. If we run gulp, now you'll see the app file is saved here. Cool. So now when we mix our styles, we get Bootstrap, we get app, and then, if you remember, we have to get the select2 CSS. So that's our final one. Libs select2.min.css. All right, so that looks good. Why don't we delete our public/CSS directory so you can see what we get from scratch. We run it, and now if we take a look, there we go. All.css, that has the contents of all three of those files. And don't forget, just to refresh your memory, when you are ready for production, do gulp production, and there you go. Exactly what you want. So that means back within app.blade, check this out. We can remove all of that and replace it like so. Now we just have to do the same thing for our scripts. And this time we want jQuery and then the select2 plugin. So back to the gulp file. We're going to mix some scripts this time. And very much like styles, the base directory for this will be resources/JS. So I want lib/jQuery and then lib/select2.min.js. Now, if we run that, we will get a public/js/all file. There we go, everything we need. And by the way, a quick note on that. If you don't like the name all, then you can name it whatever you want. So you can say public.js output.js, or really anything you want. So now, if that's what you want, then you can do it. Okay, but let's keep it with the defaults. Now, back to our master page. Once again, we can remove that entirely and replace it with all.js. And now, not only have we cleaned up our master page, but we've also improved performance because we don't have a bunch of these various HTTP requests. And of course, if you need proof that everything still works, I assure you that it does. So cool. In this episode, not only did we learn how to streamline the process of adding and removing tags, but we also made use of both Gulp and Laravel Elixir to improve performance. So why don't we call it a day?